Hi, everybody. My name is Michaela Beyer, and today I have the honor of talking with Dave Treganna. Dave Treganna is a bass player, and he has played with many bands throughout the years, including Sham 69, The Wanderers, Cherry Bombs, and probably most famously, Lords of the New Church. He recently reunited with his Lords of the New Church bandmates that are still surviving today, with Michael Monroe as their lead singer. We're going to talk about all of that and everything in between his life and career up until now. Thank you so much for coming on, Dave.
You're more than welcome.
And thank you also to your wife, Chrissy, who actually arranged this interview.
She did, didn't she? Yeah, she's good at that.
Yep. Yeah, and she's a very sweet lady. I've been very happy to correspond with her a little bit throughout the years, and I'm so honored to have you on.
Cool, no problem. Okay, let's go.
Exactly. All right, so let's start from the very beginning. Where were you born and raised?
Well, I was born actually in a place called Derby in England,
Mm,
and it's more or less, if you look at the map of the UK, it's very right in the middle.
okay.
Um, my father got a job there working for Rolls-Royce Aero engines in the early 50s.
Wow.
And he and my mother moved there. They weren't married at the time, so they told me, that it was a something that they had to keep secret because in the early 50s, it was frowned on if you weren't actually married.
Huh,
And so I was born there
nice. So you kind of came from two rebels.
out of wedlock as a bastard, as they say. Um, yes, exactly. Yeah. Although I always viewed them as very straight. And I only found out much later in life that my father actually was married before and he had two daughters. And I got in touch with my half sisters, but that was later. So I was born in Derby, but I only lived there till I was four. And my dad got another job in Yorkshire, which is in the north of England.
Hmm.
And I lived there for 4 years. Then he got a job down in outside outskirts of London, place called Chessington, southwest London.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, at the age of 8, I moved to there with a broad Yorkshire accent, and the kids at school took the piss out of me because instead of saying grass, I said grass, and that was apparently really amusing. And I soon lost my Yorkshire accent and developed a London one. So yeah, so I lived there, till I think I was 13. When I was 13, we moved just outside Kingston upon Thames, which is another town southwest of London. Um, and that's where I spent my teenage years.
Excellent.
Um,
And was anyone in your family musical?
um, well, my grandfather apparently, um, from his father, inherited a cutlery factory in Sheffield, famous steel town.
Mhm.
And he and his brother managed to completely ruin the business because they weren't at all interested in making money. And all my grandfather wanted to do was paint and write musicals and stuff like that. So he once made a banjo, handmade banjo, that was the heaviest thing I've ever lifted at that
Oh my gosh. And so,
age. And I started tinkering around on his banjo. My dad played harmonica, but never anything more than, maybe a tune or so at Christmas. So my mum and dad weren't musical at all, really. My mum liked some music, but they weren't big music fans or anything like that. I think we had a few a few long playing records which were 78s, which were really heavy. Um, the plastic, it wasn't plastic, it was metal, I think, or something, 78 RPM.
wow.
Um,
And so how did you get into playing music? I mean, did you have a friend who drew you into it, or were you just naturally musical from a young age?
I naturally always always must have been musical because I remember we had this old radio and it was a really old thing and certain channels when you wound the dial and you went through all the different frequencies, you could get like weird feedback noises and everything. I remember as a kid being fascinated by going all these funny little noises from that. So and also my uncle brought me he was in the Air Force and he used to travel the world and he brought me a ukulele and a little songbook. So probably when I was about 8 or 9, I started teaching myself a few chords, basically from this songbook on the ukulele. I mean, I had had piano lessons when I was 6, um, my I kind of I must have asked for those lessons myself, but I remember my mother arranged it, but unfortunately, I found the teacher was such a miserable old bag that I begged my mum, I don't want to go anymore. But so I had a little, but yeah, I can't say that my family were that musical, and I definitely taught myself, and it was me that had the interest in music. Yeah.
Nice. And you had the advantage of living in London, which was a major music center. Did you ever get to see any of your favorite acts live growing up?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, Kingston upon Thames was very, very musical. I mean, it had um, Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, all went to local colleges around that area of southwest London and Surrey.
Hmm.
Um, and Kingston on Thames had some great music venues. Um, we had a great pub that was when I was 17, we started being able to sneak into the pub, listen to music there. And yeah, so it was a really good place to watch bands and everything. I saw the first David Bowie concert when the first one when he did the Ziggy Stardust thing.
Oh my gosh. That
Yeah,
is
that
amazing.
was one of the highlights of bands I saw there. But we saw Queen, we saw Lou Reed, countless numbers of bands in Kingston when I was growing up there. Yeah, yeah.
Nice.
Mm.
Sammy Yaffa actually told kind of a cool story about hanging around the pubs in London, and he actually bumped into Sid Barrett there one time.
Oh wow, yeah,
Yeah, just
yeah.
I think about what it must have been like then, and how not just seeing bands live, but what a cool musical culture it must have been in that scene.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Kingston, when I was a teenager, what we're talking very early, late 60s, early 70s, and there was so much going on. I mean, talking about Sid Barrett, the first concert I went to was a free concert in Hyde Park to see Pink Floyd.
Wow.
And that was wild. There were no police, nothing. It was free to get in. It was full of Hell's Angels and full of these guys. I was 16, and I opened my eyes to a whole new culture.
Yeah.
These guys were walking around with big blocks of hashish and a knife in one hand. And anybody want to score any hash or acid? And there were Hell's Angels running around, and it was chaos. But it was a beautiful sunny day, and we survived. And Pink Floyd were great. Yeah.
Awesome. Tell me about learning to play bass growing up. Like, do you remember the first time that you held a bass in your hand?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, yeah. As I say, I started on my learning chords on a ukulele, and
Yep.
then I bought an acoustic guitar and started messing around on that, learning a few more chords. But the first electric instrument I bought was a Burns bass.
Okay.
Found it in a second-hand shop, and I think I had it for about 3 weeks. And I had a friend of mine um, who played acoustic guitar, and I took it round to his house. He didn't have an amplifier or anything, and we managed to plug it into a small record player and use the amplifier from that just for me to play bass. So I
Oh.
left it at this guy's house, and but I can't remember exact details, but at one point I went round there and the bass wasn't in his bedroom, and I said, "What happened?" And he goes, "Well, this bloke came round, and my mother asked him, what did he want, and he said, "Oh, Dave said I could borrow his bass." So she let him take my bass, and I never saw him or the bass again.
Ah.
Strange, eh? So I had a bass for about 3 weeks, around about the age of 16, 17, 18. And so that's the first time I touched bass. But then after that, I just messed around on acoustic guitar really for a long time. Um, yeah.
Alrighty. And do you remember how did that develop? I mean, did you eventually join a band when you were around that age?
No, funnily enough, no. I mean, around Kingston on Thames, Surbiton, where we were, um, there was a lot, there was a lot of introduction to the drug scene,
Oh.
and I just basically had enough. Where I was just about to leave school, and there was all kinds of pills and hashish at that time, marijuana, acid going around, and had enough of the education. I'd gone to this grammar school, and all my friends originally, when I was 11, they went to the local secondary school. I had to go to this grammar school, and it was considered a little bit snobby to go to grammar school. It wasn't a pay school or anything, but it was run really totally in an old-fashioned, straight way, and the headmaster was an ex-brigadier from the army, and he ran the whole school like an army. We weren't allowed to have our hair long at all. I once got called into his office and sent home to get a haircut because it came over the top of my ears slightly and over my shirt collar,
My
things
goodness.
like that. So, and I just decided there's no way I want to go on to further education after school. I just want to watch bands, get high, and drop out, basically.
Okay.
um, yeah. And it was a great place to do it because there was such a musical scene and many people like-minded like me, that would want to go and basically get stoned and watch bands or listen to music, in your bedroom.
Okay. Well, how did that eventually lead to you joining and becoming a musician?
Um, well, that period went on for maybe from 17 till I was about 22, so that was actually a 5-year period. Saw
Cool.
many bands, went to lots of festivals back then, did some naughty things that I'm not going to tell you about here.
Mhm.
um, but yeah, the first band that I joined was Sham 69,
Yeah.
and that again was pure one of those life-changing moments, really, that you don't realize they're going to be life-changing at the time, but when you look at it, it was actually really life-changing. And it came about because a friend of mine was going out with this girl who was 17, and
Hmm.
she was one of two sisters. Her sister was only 18 or something, and their mother was a very heavy alcoholic, and she lived on her own in quite a big house in Walton-on-Thames.
Okay.
And she passed away due to alcoholism and left this 4-bedroom, quite posh house in Walton-on-Thames, left it to the girls. So all of a sudden, the two sisters and my friend and many of other of us had a place to hang out, as any 18 to 22-year-olds, and so
Yeah.
there was no parental control, nothing. So it was quite a party house. And just absolutely coincidentally, it happened to be on the other side of the street from the house where Dave Parsons, who was 18, was still living with his parents, and Dave Parsons being the guitarist of Sham 69.
Yep.
So Dave got to know, obviously, about this party house opposite, and he brought the other guys from Sham 69 there, and we would hang out, listen to music. And it was obviously in the heyday of punk, in early 77. Lots of great things happening. So I got friends with Sham 69. And in fact, first time I went to see them, I'd not been in a band yet. And I actually saw them, and I thought, they're not that good. They're really not very good musicians. But the attitude is amazing, and so I was impressed with the attitude. So when they suddenly said they were looking for a rhythm guitarist, I said, well, I played acoustic guitar for many years without being in bands. I can hold down chords and everything. So they said, right, we need a rhythm guitarist. So I joined Sham 69 as a rhythm guitarist. Very soon after that, I think I did only 2 gigs with them.
Okay.
But yeah, the first gig was on top of a rooftop, just off Oxford Street,
Oh.
which actually I played half the set. I was due to play half the set actually, but apparently we'd got on the wrong rooftop.
Huh.
It was the rooftop of the next door premises, and this is about 4 stories high.
Yeah.
And the singer got arrested basically. So I'd done that gig and one other, and then we got this deal with Polydor, and they wanted to record, a live set. And we decided that, that I had to play bass because of the problems with the bass player keeping time. Um, so they said, went out and bought a bass and learnt the songs basically on the bass, did a couple of rehearsals, and then the first time that I played bass on stage was recorded for the first Jam album, which is a pretty fast introduction into the world of recording record
Exactly.
deals. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And how did it feel being part of something like that? I mean, you had been basically a scenester for about 5 years at that point, where you had been part of it and you had watched so many bands. I mean, did you feel like you were ready for that moment, or was it life affirming? I mean, how did you feel?
I felt brilliant. I felt great, because before that, as I said, I really didn't. I wanted to drop out of education, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew what I didn't want to do, but I didn't want to be without a job either.
Hmm.
I like to earn more than you could get on the dole.
Yeah.
So I thought the only thing I like doing is driving, really. So I got a couple of driving jobs, and so of course, when I finally got a recording contract, I was just gobsmacked. I never thought that it would happen, especially that quick. Anyway.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, so I gave up the day jobs from that moment on for quite a
Excellent.
long while, which we'll go into later.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah,
And so half of that album was recorded live, like you said, and then half was in the studio. What was it
yeah.
like yeah, what was it like being in a studio environment? I mean, did that
Well,
give you a chance to learn a lot and to kind of perfect your craft?
well, it was pretty whirlwind the first time we are in there, to be honest, and but it was an amazing experience. I'd never been in a recording studio before,
Hmm.
and we recorded it in the Polydor building, in Polydor's own studio, in a place called Stratford Place, which is just off Oxford Street.
Okay.
So it was these posh buildings and an environment that was just like being in a spacecraft to me, with all the outboard gear and the lights and the massive desk and the little room where you record and everything. So that was quite magical, yeah. Um, and as well, of course, being Sham 69, we had some rather rowdy road crew and hangers on. So we had a lot of hassle in there. We were when all the workers from Polydor in their various offices in this 6-story building,
Hmm.
they'd all gone home and we'd be just the only ones in there at night. And so all these guys that were like football hooligans and retrobates and everything, we got in so much trouble because they did all kinds of nasty things and went through all the offices and everywhere, stealing all these records and rare pressings and things like that.
Oh,
So we got into a lot of trouble while we were there, but we had a really good time, and it was yeah. I can't really say that I learned much, um, other than it sounds really great to hear your own music back in a professional studio environment.
yeah. Well,
So that
eventually you got
it was a great time, a really good time, but it was only quite short. We only there for a week
okay. And I was gonna say, you said it was off of Oxford
or
Street.
so.
Isn't Oxford Street where the Marquee is?
The Marquee isn't actually Oxford Street is where the 100 Club is. That's
Okay.
the famous, but the Marquee is very close to Oxford Street, yeah, but not in. It's in Wardour Street. It was the original Marquee.
Okay, cool. And
Mm.
anyway, I was gonna say, as far as the bass playing goes, apparently you got better. I mean, Timo Calcio, who, you know, I still miss to this day. He actually cited you as one of his favorite bass players that he's ever worked with, along with Sammy Yaffa, Jimmy Ashhurst,
Oh,
and I think I can't remember. Oh, and Alvin Gibbs as well.
yeah, I had to pay him £20 to say that. No, I'm joking. No, Timo was obviously one of my best and closest friends for a long, long while. Yeah, so but yeah, he always said to me, that you're one of my fave bass players.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. He was a
Um,
wonderful man, by the way. Like I said, I still miss him.
I do too. Yeah, he was absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
Alrighty, so Anyway, the album came out, and tell me what that was like. I mean, what was the response to that album like?
Um, the first album, we maybe got a couple of mixed reviews, but mainly everything was really good. And we had the backing of Polydor Records,
Mhm.
and we started just touring and touring and touring. Um, we did many gigs all over the UK. Sometimes, in the very first days when I joined, for the first 3 months or so, I guess, before um, we managed to persuade our tight-fisted manager to release some of the loads of money he'd got from signing us to Polydor, that we got a bit more comfortable transport. But I remember, I don't know if you know what a transit van is. It's very famous, Ford Transit. It's a small van where you have 3 seats in the front and then a back section where you can put equipment. And we were traveling all over the country, like with 3 people in the front and the rest of us lying on the top of the amplifiers and bass and lead cabinets and everything on top of all the equipment.
Ah,
So
luxurious.
yeah, but yeah. So the first album received very well. Things started just taking off very fast from there.
And tell me what it was like being able to travel around like that a little bit. I mean, you'd kind of moved, so you knew what the rest of what certain parts of England were like. But did you enjoy the experience of traveling and getting to see different
Well,
towns?
I mean, I'd always enjoyed traveling, and from when I was 17, I passed my test and drove a car, and so I'd driven around a lot around England to all the places of natural beauty like Cornwall, Wales, the Lake Districts, and
Mhm.
all those kind of places. So I was the more travelled one. Jimmy Percy had never been outside of the Greater London area.
Whoa.
He'd never seen the seaside, which is difficult when you're on the island of Great Britain because it's surrounded by sea.
Yeah.
But I remember one very early gig going up in that transit van, um, and we got maybe like 50 miles out of London, and he said, "Where is this bloody town? Where is it?" And we said, "Well, we're not even halfway there yet." And he goes, "What? I'm not going this far. Turn the van around. We're going back." Of course, we didn't. We persuaded him, but so back then I was the one that had travelled. So, but apart from the fact that it was freezing cold sometimes, lying in a van on top of the equipment, um, I did enjoy going around and seeing, as I always do, like seeing new places and traveling.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah,
Just I guess I asked that question because I'm such a traveler and I love the United Kingdom, and it must have, even if you'd already done it, still that must have been such a fun experience to do it with your bandmates and to,
it was
get to
great.
see it.
Yeah, and um, seeing all we were filling out the places, and that there was a big buzz going about Sham 69. So, there were lots of people wanting to come and speak to us backstage and everything. So it was always chaos and crowded, but we met some really cool people, and cool fans. And
Excellent.
it was really good time. Yeah,
Nice. And so you had a songwriting credit on Sham 69's second album, Is This Me or Is This You?
yeah.
Did you feel like tell me about how you started songwriting? I mean, was it something you really enjoyed, or was it something that you had to work hard
Well,
on?
to be honest, Michaela, which I will be, I
Mhm.
didn't write that song.
Oh, okay.
No.
Um,
Well, you see, the way it works with a lot of bands that I've been in, it's usually the main writers are the singer and the guitarist.
mhm.
Singer writing the lyrics, the guitarist writing the chords and the structure.
Yeah.
Um, so I have always wanted to make my own bass lines up.
Mhm.
So I have quite a lot of input, and drummers that I played with have input as well, but we don't get writing credits because it's not the melody and it's not the music, if you like, even though we have a big impact on the music. So I had a bit of a beef with them, and I said, "Look, I'm part of the creating process and everything." So Jimmy and Dave agreed that me and the drummer would get some credits even though we didn't write the songs.
Yeah.
But having said that, I have always like tinkered around. I can't write lyrics. Hands up, I'm not a good lyric writer. Occasionally I'll get some ideas, but it's not my forte by any means.
Okay.
I can write chord sequences, I can write melodies, but the lyrics themselves, I would always leave to someone else. So I think the first song that I actually did write, um, I took to Steve Baters when we formed the Wanderers. And so I actually the song on the Wanderers album called Soldier Soul for Fame actually is my song. Steve altered a few of the lyrics, so he gets writing credits as well. But that was the first one that I actually wrote.
Nice. So were you really proud of that?
Yeah, yeah, I was, yeah. And later on I have, collaborated, as perhaps we'll talk about a bit later, with other members of bands, yeah. But
Nice.
that was the first time I was writing, and that is why I got the credits on Sham 69.
Okay. Well, you deserved it. I mean, even if you didn't write
Yeah,
that song, you're
it
right.
it
You
it
were
meant
part of
that I
it.
got some royalties anyway
Well,
for
that's
being
nice too.
paid for the creative process and not just the mechanicals you get for recording a song as being a player. Yeah.
Exactly. Alrighty. So, you were with Sham 69 on two more albums. Do you remember any kind of highlights from that time, like a favorite show you did, or
I remember lots of highlights from those times. Yeah, it
excellent,
was a
excellent.
brilliant time, yeah, and some really good things happened. I mentioned, for instance, that rooftop gig,
Uh-huh. And
which was just a mirror of the Beatles gig. I don't know, have you ever seen that letter? Yeah,
of,
where they
of
play on
course,
a rooftop.
actually,
It was just like that, except it was a punk band playing, and that was just a great feeling because we played in the middle of the day, sort of 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and all the surrounding buildings were all like four or five stories high, just off Oxford Street, Hanway
yeah.
Street it was. And when we started playing, more and more people, secretaries and lawyers and people in suits were all leaning out the window. And when the police finally came and arrested us because we'd actually gone onto the next door's rooftop, which was technically trespassing, and when the police told us to stop playing, we said, "No, we're not going to stop playing. Piss off!" And all the rest of the people down the street were going, "Let them play." Um, but yeah, so things like that. Then another really big highlight for me was when we played Reading Festival.
That's
It was the
right.
first time I played in August the 25th, 1978. Um,
Oh,
we played in front of, I don't know, maybe 15, 20,000 people or something. So that
oh,
that was, an amazing experience. And if it was the kind of icing on the cake for that occasion was we just started recording a second album. And we were recording it in a place called Tittenhurst Park Studios, which is the place where the Beatles bought. And
oh,
at the time we were recording, it had been sold, I think, by John Lennon. It had been sold to Ringo Starr.
uh-huh.
So, but it still had some of the iconic, what would you call them, artistic pieces are dotted around the grounds. Like had these three or four fiberglass dinosaurs that were about 2 stories high, and
Nice. And
it had a
uh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, and it had an old Rolls Royce that John Lennon had crushed by a crushing machine, and it was just a rusty cube. The studio engineer said to me, "Oh, you'll find John Lennon's Rolls Royce if you go down that little path, through those bushes." I came back. I can't see a bloody Rolls Royce. Are you joking me? So he came out with me, pulled a bush apart, and there was this rusty cube sitting there, and it was John Lennon had it crushed. God knows why he did it and left it there. But the even best thing of all was that when we had gone into that recording studio, I think it was only a day or two before Reading Festival, and it happened to be very close to Reading, which was
Mhm.
ideal. It was a great setup.
Yeah,
It was a live-in studio. It's where John Lennon recorded Imagine, that famous video for Imagine. Same
exactly. That,
same
yeah,
place.
yeah, that's
Yeah, and
actually what I was
so
gonna, sorry, go ahead.
yeah. Go on, no, go on.
Well, I was actually gonna ask about that. So you got to see the actual room where he filmed the music video of that as well, where he had his white piano?
Not only that, but when I got there, being a live-in studio, I always like to, while the others are looking at the studio, I have a habit of wanting to find the nicest bedroom.
Mhm.
So I went upstairs and I opened the door, and this bedroom, a big bedroom with a big double bed, and it had a thick shag pile carpet, which had a lot of jack sockets, where you plug in a jack cable from a guitar.
Yeah.
And then I looked at the bed head, and either side of the bed, there were two lamps. And underneath one lamp, it had a little wooden plaque that said John, and underneath the other, it said Yoko. So I was actually sleeping in John and Yoko's bed.
That is so amazing. Oh my
Yeah.
god. I love that
So
story. Ah,
yeah, so that was a fantastic day. And even more than that, if you can believe it, I know it's August the 25th, but at Reading Festival, um, there was this girl that I'd always fancied, and she was managing a band called the Automatics, and they were playing lower on the bill than Sham. And she thought I was the roadie for Sham 69 for some reason. We'd seen each other in clubs and that, but as I went onto stage, I realised I hadn't got a plectrum, and she was in the backstage area, And I said, "Oh, you haven't got a spare plectrum, have you?" And she said, "Yeah." And she said, "Oh, you're the bass player." And I said, "Yeah." So we got talking afterwards, and I said, "Do you want to come back to our studio?" So that night she came back, and we slept together in John and Yoko's bed, and
oh,
we were together for 11 years after that. It was my first big love.
oh, that is so
So
cool.
can you imagine all those things happening on the same day?
Yep.
Yeah, just a fairy tale, really.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, that
Yeah.
is amazing. And that's definitely amazing because I'm like the biggest John Lennon fan on the planet. So,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, that is
Yeah.
and that is so cool. Just
But
and
the real bummer is that I didn't, in those days, you didn't have a mobile phone, so we didn't take any photos or anything. I would have
well,
been so good, yeah.
mhm.
There,
And
there, there's a couple of promo shots of the band outside the big white house when we're on the lawn in front of it,
okay. Yeah,
but
I think
nothing of the bedroom,
mm, okay.
which is a
Yeah,
real shame, really. Yeah, yeah.
well, that but I would love to use the pictures that you guys used outside of the White House to promote this interview. I mean, that's such an interesting story, and that honestly, that's never one that I've heard in anything that I've studied about you. So,
Okay.
like, yeah, yeah. Do you have those pictures in your archive? Like, would you be able to send them to me?
I think I do. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, if
yeah.
you could
I
message those.
certainly I found them myself, and anything I find like that, I'll save it. So I'll dig them out somewhere buried deep in one of my folders on this laptop.
Excellent. That'd be great.
Yeah,
Just
yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, and honestly, when you were telling the story about the concert on the rooftop, the Beatles were the first thing I thought of.
yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah.
And me too. I felt, hey, we're doing it because I was a big Beatles fan. Like having been born in 1954, when Beatlemania started, which was the very end of '63 and mainly '64. I was a 9-year-old kid, and I just remember everything was Beatles.
Mm,
You went into a shop and bought some bubble gum, and it came with a Beatles card. A set you could collect. Um, yeah, and I love the Beatles. Yeah.
I love the Beatles too, and it's cool to hear that you were a fan of them. But like, was there ever any moment where, like, in the punk scene, you kind of you where there was some kind of denial of your love for the Beatles, or was there always kind of or was there a respect for the Beatles in the punk scene? I'm a little curious about that.
A lot of people secretly, when they said, diss, oh God, it started again. They
Oh,
kind of dissed the band, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all the Who and all those old bands. They kind of dissed them a bit, but secretly, when you got talking one to one with someone, well, actually, I really like the Beatles, or like Brian James hated the Beatles, even though he saw them.
oh, okay.
Brian from Lords of New Church.
Yeah,
So I think he
exactly.
saw, I think he saw the Beatles in Croydon when he was just about um, pro- probably in 60. I don't know. I might have got that wrong. But anyway, he always liked the Stones and didn't like the Beatles. I like both the Stones and the Beatles. But yeah, a lot of punks, it was fashionable then to kind of diss all the old bands that had come before. But, you know, every every punk person that I know that had any credibility to me would have either liked the Beatles or the Stones or the Kinks or the Who or the Cream or Velvet Underground, Led Zeppelin, all those big 60s bands that we were supposedly anti.
Yeah,
Most of the people on the early punk scene, at least on the early punk scene, were you know actually fans of those and appreciated those bands.
there you go. And and to me it's all rock and roll. And a lot of their
Yeah, me
yeah,
too.
yeah. And
Yeah,
honestly, if you look at the people bands like the Beatles and the Stones and punk bands, they're not really all that ideologically opposed. Like they
no.
say,
I mean, the Stones were very radical in '69 and Street Fighting Man and stuff like that. And
yep, and
um,
Gimme Shelter.
yeah, yeah. And I've always had a very eclectic taste of music. I, I I like good music, whatever genre it might be.
Exactly.
I
Me
like
too.
good playing. I like good music, and yeah. So it's to me like you say, those all those bands. Led Zeppelin, are brilliant band. I've been listening to them again recently. One of the first albums I bought was Led Zeppelin 2.
Oh, cool. Nice.
Yeah.
My father is actually the biggest Led Zeppelin fan on the planet. I grew up listening to
Wow.
Led Zeppelin, and Dolly Parton actually tried to get Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, and John Paul Jones to play on her new album, and like apparently they turned her down. And when I heard that, I was so disappointed. I'm like, oh, that would have been such a cool collaboration.
Yeah. I have a little Led Zeppelin story.
Cool. Tell me.
Um, it makes me look rather stupid, but like I say, I was always a big Led Zeppelin fan, and so you would think I would have a very clear and good memory of when I met Jimmy Page and Robert Plant,
Mhm.
but I don't. And it only came up because we happened to be chatting in the van quite recently, me, Jimmy Percy, and Dave Parsons, when we were on the way to a gig, and came across it. And they reminded me that when we were doing some recording in Shepperton Studios, it's where Led Zeppelin had all their equipment. And at one point, they took us round their massive, great warehouse where they had all their equipment. And I
Mhm.
said, I don't remember that. Are you sure I was there? Yeah, you were definitely there. Why don't you? And I've got this kind of vague memory, but I don't know. Maybe I had a lot of drink or something. I don't,
Aw.
but isn't it weird? Like, why would you forget something like that? Because
Yeah.
I was a big Led Zeppelin fan, from the age of 17 or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it probably was like a case of having had a lot to drink or something, but still, I mean, that's cool.
Mm,
And I actually found a picture recently, going back to, we were talking about the Reading Festival, but apparently, Guy Bailey from the Choir Boys, who I almost interviewed before he passed away, it was heartbreaking to me. We had the
yeah,
interview scheduled, but he got a little too sick to do it right before he passed.
yeah.
But on a more positive note, I actually found a picture of him and Jimmy Page talking together when the Choir Boys played the Reading Festival.
Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Guy was a sweet guy.
He really was. I didn't
Yeah.
know him stunningly well, but I got to message with him a bit and talk with him on the phone, and I'm so sad that he died so young. And
Yeah. I first came across them when they were called the Queer Boys, and they
that's right.
supported the Cherry Bombs,
Mhm.
and we were doing a lot of university gigs. A lot of gigs were in universities halls, and the student unions started objecting to their name, the Queer Boys, and said that they couldn't have it. So they decided to change the name to the Choir Boys so they could stay on the tour with us. So I've known him since then, and I even played in a band with Guy called Sweethearts of the Rodeo in a little known album. But it was almost a country album.
Mhm. Yeah, he was a big fan of the Flying Burrito Brothers, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, sweet
yeah,
guy. Yeah,
yeah. One thing that always struck me about him when I saw his pictures was what huge hands he had. I'm like, dude, his parents probably looked at his hands when he was born and said, "Yep, he's gonna play basketball, or he's gonna play the guitar, or he's gonna be a doctor."
yeah, yeah. No, it's such a shame that Guy passed recently. Timo and Guy, and several others have gone just recently. But
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Timo was the one where I was probably the most sad because I knew him a little bit better, and
Mm,
like I said, I still miss him, and I really hope that
mm.
his book gets released at some point. I know that he had kind of just been finishing up his memoirs when he passed away.
Yeah, I'm not sure about. I haven't heard about that, to be honest. I managed to get hold of some of his record collection from Becky, his last girlfriend,
Hmm.
in because she was moving from Helsinki and she
Yeah.
wanted to get rid of it. So I took some of that from her. And I also just recently, a couple of weeks ago, when I was in London, I went and visited his ex-wife Helen, who actually used to go out with Guy Bailey. So,
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and some
yeah, and
songs on their second album were about her.
yeah, so I saw Helen and Timo's two sons, Alec and Lucas, and
Nice.
they gave me some of his jewelry as a memento.
That's wonderful. And how's Helen doing? And how are the boys doing?
They're all doing really great. Yeah, they're happy. Helen had um, a split up with a previous partner, and she's doing much better now. She's
Good.
living with Lucas, the youngest,
Well, good.
and Kaya, Timo's daughter, is doing really well. She's really got into piercing and tattoos. She works in a tattoo parlor. Yeah.
Yeah, she
She
kind of
looks
inherited
brilliant.
that his artistic streak, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, no, Alec is a proficient bass player and drummer. Mm,
Mhm.
yeah, so good. But it was great to see them. I hadn't seen them since Timo's funeral.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'd love to meet all of them. I've met Becky, and she's a lovely lady. I really like her, but I haven't been lucky enough to meet any of his kids or Helen. But it's nice to hear that they're doing well.
Yeah, they are definitely. Yeah,
Excellent.
all good there.
Excellent. Alrighty, cool. So back to you. Do you remember the
So
first
I
time that
mean, yeah, just to finish off, there's so many things that I could say in those the highlights of the early years of Sham 69, but we could be here for another 2 hours talking about all the incidents and the fun that we had. Yeah, but it was all good.
yeah, but actually along that line, I heard that you're trying to write a memoir. Do you think that you'll get that completed within the next couple of years?
I hope so. Yeah, yeah. I've been doing quite a bit of research recently. I've had it in mind for a long while, but um, moving to Finland and other family situations, I haven't really done much to start on it till just recently, where I've been, trying to find out what happened when.
Okay. Well, I mean,
um,
if you ever, if I think that would be a wonderful thing, though, whether it's a memoir from you or if you and the members of Sham 69 were able to get together and write a book about and kind of release a book about the band. I think that would be a great way to bolster the band's legacy as well.
yeah,
Sometimes, yeah, that's another thing that I've actually been trying to convince the surviving choir boys to do. We'll see if it happens, but
yeah.
anyway, I'd really love it if you were able to do that. Like I said, whether it's a memoir or a book about Sham 69.
Well, if you ever come across anyone out in LA that can put a pinpoint exact dates when we did certain things, Sham 69 or the Lords or the Wanderers or the Cherry Bombs, you know, out in USA, because you can find quite a lot on the internet, but there's some conflicting stories. And did we actually play them? People's memories get distorted. So the more kind of people that say, yeah, I saw them there, or I was there when this happened. Yeah. If you
Yeah.
ever get a chance to relay any of that information, it will be much appreciated.
Excellent. I might actually have a chance to do that tomorrow. I'm filming another interview at the Rainbow, so you know,
Okay, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I can dig up a little research there. Okay, cool. So back um to your life. Do you remember the first time you met Stiv Bators?
Yeah, I do. Surprisingly enough, one of the things I do remember, yeah, it was at Sham 69 gig in New York City, at a place called Harrah's. I think we played 2 nights there, and Stiv came along on one of the nights and introduced himself.
Hmm,
So that was the very first time we met. Yeah.
nice. And was there anything distinguishing about him, or was it just kind of a normal hello and goodbye?
Well, I knew that he was the singer of the Dead Boys, and I kind of expected him to be a lot more outrageous or objectionable, or But he was just a nice, charming, intelligent guy.
And how did you guys keep in touch after that? Or
Well, that we did definitely, because it wasn't long after that that Sham 69 split up, or Jimmy wanted to do something else. So the three of us remaining members of Sham 69 um, wanted to stay together, play together, and we needed a singer. So I think the drummer managed to get a contact for Steve and ask him if he wanted to form a band.
excellent.
Oh,
And was
we did. We did hook up with Steve. Sorry, we hooked up before the Wanderers, even when we played in LA. We went out to LA. I don't know if we actually did any gigs there at the time, but this is something maybe you can find out. I know we played the Whiskey with Sham, but I can't remember whether it was that time that we went in the studio where Steve was recording his solo album, Disconnected,
okay.
and we sang backing vocals on a song called LA,
Oh, nice. And
along
what was
with.
it like being for you being out there? Was that your first time going to California?
Yeah, it was great. I really loved it. Yeah. It was such a different place to, the UK and even the East Coast, which I'd just been to. But yeah, it was great. Really nice place. We stayed at the Tropicana, which is a famous old rock and roll motel.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, met loads of wacky people. And Kim Fowley, we were hanging out with a band called the Orchids, BB Buell, um, Rodney Bingenheimer, the Cramps. So we met all these people and had a blast there. We weren't there that long, but we had a real party time there.
Well, I'm glad
Yeah,
that you were clever enough to escape Kim Fowley.
yeah. Well, at the time, I thought he was a bit. There was something there about him. Like he came to meet us at the airport because Ricky, the drummer, had got in touch with him,
Mhm.
and he turned up with this five girls from this band, the Orchids, who he was managing, and he kind of like directed at them, and they all went into this chorus of a song they had called Teenage Babylon, I think, like three-part harmony, Teenage Babylon. And I thought, this is really weird. But then we got to know the girls, and they were great fun. They were really good. They showed us around LA, and then we got, through Rodney Bingenheimer, we got to hang out at his place, and yeah, we went in the studio with Steve and recorded backing vocals, and I think even Jimmy Percy sang half the verses of this song LA, which you can find somewhere on YouTube now.
Nice. And tell me,
Yeah,
was it a bit of a surprise when Sham 69 broke up? I mean, had you guys known that Jimmy wanted to do something else?
yeah. It was all getting too much for him because we had a lot of hassles in Sham 69 with we not that we encouraged it, and we did everything we could to discourage it, like playing Rock Against Racism gigs, but we had a hardcore skinhead bunch that used to come to the gigs that were, Nazis, and they would beat up the audience. And it was getting a lot very difficult doing live gigs. And the press had kind of built Jimmy up to be this man of the people and a kind of hero. And then they started knocking him down, some of the press.
Mhm.
And Jimmy couldn't take much more of it. And he just said, look, we can't carry on doing this. I want to do something different. So he decided that he wasn't going to be the singer, but we still had a deal with Polydor to do one more album. So we agreed with them if we could get a singer, they would promote an album. So we got Steve over to London and formed the Wanderers.
Excellent. And what was it like with Stiv as a bandmate? I mean, he's so well remembered in popular culture now. I mean, what was he like?
Well, he was multifaceted. He could be a charming, intelligent guy. He could be a little prick, um, badly behaved and got up been a pest and a nuisance. He was incredibly funny sometimes. He would love to do pranks. One of his favorites were the Three Stooges. You know, there's a
Yeah.
famous American show apparently called the Three Stooges. Yeah, and
Yeah, which I grew
he
up
loved
watching that show.
he loved that kind of humor. He could be sometimes he could get very down. So he was a, but in general, I got on great with Steve, and we shared a flat together in London at one.
Nice. And was he a good partner, creatively? I mean, did you really feel a great musical affinity with him from early on?
Yeah, I mean, he came over, and Dave Parsons being the main musical guy of Sham 69, Steve immediately um, got a really good um, relationship creatively, working together and writing the Wanderers songs.
Mhm.
So apart from that one I mentioned that I wrote, "Sold Your Soul for Fame," yeah, and so it came together quite quickly and very easily. Yeah,
Nice.
the Wanderers. Yeah.
Awesome. And what do you think of the Wanderers album? I mean, is that one of your favorites still?
Um, I went through a period of thinking we put too much synth on it,
Hmm.
and it wasn't punky enough. We had a producer called Mick Glossop. He was quite a good producer, but he was um, we had a synth player come in, and he wanted to do more synth than perhaps I would have done. But now when I listen to it back in retrospect, I think it's a really good album. I don't mind it so much. But at the time I was thinking maybe we've just gone a little bit over the top with synth and not raw enough. But now I can listen to it, um, as maybe a fan would. And I think it's a great album actually. Yeah, some good
So do
songs,
I.
and it really shows Steve's transition from the Dead Boys and the lyrical content of most of the Dead Boys type songs to Lords of the New Church, where Steve kind of blossomed lyrically, and talked about subjects that perhaps weren't right for the Dead Boys at all, and a little bit more considerate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a wonderful album. I mean, I'll confess I actually did not know about that album until I began researching our interview, and it was a wonderful little kind of unexpected treasure that I found.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Glad you
Alrighty,
liked it.
yeah. And Artie, so you also worked with Johnny Thunders briefly. What was that like?
Well, that was one thing that I was going to say, that was not at this time.
Oh,
This
okay,
this was a bit later than the Wanderers times.
okay.
So I mean, I can talk about it now, and we can then go back to what happened after the Wanderers if you want. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I got to know Johnny quite well. This girl that I mentioned that I started the relationship on the night sleeping in John and Yoko's bed.
Uh-huh.
She knew Johnny Thunders, so I got to know him through her. And funnily enough, when I was in New York the first time and the second time as well, a lot of people would mistake me for Johnny Thunders. I
Really?
once got refused. I can't remember the name of the place. It was a famous venue in New York. It had several levels. There was a bar on one level, and you took a lift down and up. Don't know if it means anything to you. I can't remember the name of it, but it's quite a big place. And I once went in there and went to the bar to buy a drink, and the barmaid, who was quite a cute barmaid, goes, I can't serve you." And I said, "What do you mean you can't serve me?" And she said, "Oh, come on, you're banned." And I said, "Who do you think I am?" "Johnny, don't. Who do you think?" I said, "I'm Dave Treganna from London. Can't you tell my accent?" And she said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were Johnny Thunders." Um, so yeah, people would say we look the same, and we our paths kind of intertwined in some weird ways. That he had a child with a girl from Sweden. I
Yes, he
don't know
did.
if you know, Suzanne Blomqvist.
Hmm.
And just I had a brief fling with Suzanne when I was playing in Sweden. She came into the dressing room and she took an instant fancy to me. And I think it's one of those things again, because I look like Johnny Thunders, because we had a little fling. And at one point, I had arranged to meet her. We were going to do a gig in Finland.
Hmm.
And in those days, again, you didn't, telephones were, communications were difficult.
Yeah.
And so I I'd arranged to meet her in this hotel that we were staying at in Finland,
Hmm.
and got to the hotel and she wasn't there. She was supposed to be there, and I had one number of a friend I managed to get of hers. She lived in Stockholm, and I said, "Is Suzanne there?" And she said, "No, is that Dave?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "I hate to tell you, but last night she got off with Johnny Thunders."
Oh,
Oh, that bastard! But no hard feelings, and she actually became the mother of his child, Jamie.
yeah. Who
Um,
looks
I,
just
I
like him?
did,
It's kind of uncanny.
yeah. And I have a pair of Johnny Thunders shoes. When I was living in London at one time, he came round to my house, and in typical Johnny fashion, he disappeared to the bathroom for about half an hour or more. And when he came out, he had one of my shirts from the wardrobe, and he going, "Hey, hey, hey, Dave, Dave, I want your shirt. I want your shirt." I said, "I like that shirt. You got, I'm having it." And I said, "Okay, but you got to give me something." So he gave me a pair of these Italian leather shoes.
A good trade.
And then I of course sang backing vocals on um his album Que Sera Sera,
Yes.
Endless Party, along with Stiv and Mike Monroe and I think Nasty, Suicide, Patty Paladin. That was good fun. Yeah, so I've seen Johnny. Timo played with Johnny for a while and used to go and see him when the two reggae guys
Yeah.
in that outfit with Johnny. And Johnny was again, he is a sad character in a way. He always had this kind of loneliness to him.
Hmm.
Um, but and he had that problem, of course, with being a junkie.
Yeah. I mean,
But
and
he
he's one
was
of those.
underneath. You could tell he was a really good soul,
Mhm.
but
Yeah. Good.
it destroyed him really. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's one of those people, kind of like what you were talking about with Stiv before, who, you know, a good person, but one who had a lot of problems and a lot of difficulties internally that,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think with Steve, it was less with drugs and more with depression, probably.
say
And
Dave.
one other thing about I will say about Johnny, we played a gig in Paris with Lords and a New Church, and Johnny was in town, and we asked him, to come up and play a number with us. I don't remember what number it was, but I do remember him coming onto stage. It was towards the end of the set, and he was a little bit out of it, but he kind of stumbled onto the stage, and I was thinking, okay, when's he going to actually play something? Because he was kind of shifting around and not really doing anything. And I don't know what was going through his head. But all of a sudden, he just hit the guitar with one bending note. And it literally sent the hair on the back of my neck up. It was the most beautiful note I've ever heard.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I've kind of heard mixed things about him live. Like there are some people who say that he was so brilliant and he was so emotional and
yeah.
amazing live, and other people who say that he could be really sloppy and kind of all
Oh,
over the
yeah,
place.
yeah.
So
I've seen several shows where he's been sloppy and out of it, too out of it to play. But I've also seen him when he's been really on form and he's been brilliant. So yeah, just depended on how out of it he was.
and Dave, I want to say thank you for being so open with me. I love just I feel like you have this big treasure trove of stories, and just you know what to add to each question. Just thank you so much for just you're a great interviewee, I've got to say.
Oh, oh well, thank you.
You really
Yeah.
are. You really are.
Okay.
And again, I really hope that you do either your memoir or a book about Sham 69, because I think that you would be wonderful at that. So,
Yeah. I fully intend to at some point.
excellent. Okay, cool. Alrighty. So let's get back to questions. Describe the
Yeah.
formation of Lords of the New Church.
Well, that happened after the Wanderers. Um, Steve and Brian James had been friends since the Dead Boys had come over and toured with the Damned in 1977. And they'd got on very well when they were touring together, you know, the two
Hmm.
groups. And Steve and Brian had always said they'd like to work together. Steve admired Brian's guitaring. Brian admired Steve's personality, his um, ability to be a great front man and to write lyrics. So they always said they'd hook up together. And
Hmm.
Polydor didn't really promote the Wanderers album. And at one point, I was sharing a flat by that time with Steve in Notting Hill,
Yeah.
in on the Portobello Road area,
Mhm.
Notting Hill. In fact, next door neighbour was Julie Christie, who was one of my boyhood idols.
Oh my gosh.
I used to look out of our little basement window and see her going up the steps next door and thinking, should I run out and meet her and not being too nervous? Because she's been,
Yeah.
anyway, I think she's brilliant.
Yeah.
But yes,
I
sorry.
actually just saw a movie called McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and she's brilliant
Oh,
in that film.
yeah. Well, one of my favourite movies of all time is Don't Look Now, Nicholas Roeg movie.
Oh, I
I
haven't
don't know
seen
if
it.
you know.
What's
I
it called
think it
again?
might be called Death in Venice in some. It's Don't Look Now by
Okay.
Nicholas Roeg.
I'll watch it.
Brilliant movie. You got to check it out.
I will.
And Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland.
Nice. I love Donald Sutherland too.
Mm,
He's such an amazing
yeah.
actor.
Well, that movie to me is, I think, one of my favourite movies. And I'm not a big movie buff, so it's saying a lot. Yeah. So anyway, I was sharing a flat with Steve, and he at one point, we were wondering what we're going to do with the Wanderers because Polydor wasn't really into um, continuing the record deal after we did that album. Um, they didn't want to pick up any more options. Um, was not very happy with the manager who had managed Sham 69 and then was managing us with the Wanderers. Steve
Yeah.
didn't get on with him. So he'd spoke to Brian and they'd started rehearsing together. And Steve, said to me, like, I hope you don't mind, but me and Brian are rehearsing with Tony James and Terry Chimes, um, starting a new project together. So I said, well, I don't mind, but it's a bit of a shame. And Steve said, but don't worry, I'll get you into the band. And after after only a couple of rehearsals, Brian and Tony James fell out musically. They didn't want to go the same musical direction.
Yeah.
And Steve said to Brian, what about Dave Treganna from Wanderers Sham 69? And Brian at first was a bit reticent because he had something against Sham 69. And Steve managed to persuade him to give me a try. So I went down to the rehearsals. Terry Chimes was still drumming,
Hmm.
and I just hit it off with Brian straight away. Um, Brian said, "Oh, I don't know why Brian had it against me, but we hit it off right away, and we had a good musical thing going. And we decided that Terry was a great drummer, a rock steady drummer, but we wanted something different. We wanted to do something a little bit different.
Okay.
And so Terry was a bit straight, and we tried to get him to do things a little bit off the wall, out the box.
Hmm.
Um, but it wasn't quite working. So Steve and I had gone along to this psychedelic club in Soho to see a band called the Barracudas, and we saw Nicky Turner drumming with them, and he just did this a completely different style of drumming that
Yeah.
was more jungly, almost more minimal, and we thought, hey, he'd be great to do the songs that we're working on.
Yeah.
So we went backstage and asked him, and he said, well, actually, things aren't going too well with the Barracudas. I'll give it a shot. So we got Nicky Turner in, and that was how the Lords first formed. Yeah. We didn't have a name. We played one gig. Nicky had been offered a gig in Paris by one of the top guitar magazines for their Christmas party.
Oh.
And so we went along and did that. We didn't have a name. They said, well, we have to put, we're happy that Steve Bader's, Dave Treganna and Brian James are going to be in your band, Nicky. And we're sad that it can't be the Barracudas, but we'll take that anyway. And so we came up with a name, The Things. When we got to Paris, they'd misspelt it and it was The Thins. with a Z at the end.
Gosh.
We had drunk a lot of champagne on the plane. We got to the gig, there was more partying going. John Jack Burnell turned up with a bag of weed. And by the time we went on, bear in mind that this was the first time ever we'd played the songs live that we'd been rehearsing on. So we weren't that confident with them anyway. But we played probably the worst shambles gig I've ever done in my life. I think everyone was playing different parts or different numbers at the same time. But the French thought we were absolutely brilliant and a totally great psychedelic band. So, that shows one thing that you always learn as a musician, that the way you feel a show is going can be totally different from the way the audience perceive it.
Exactly. And
So
and even if it wasn't like as technically well heeled as what perhaps you wanted it to be, I think what the audience noticed was just the chemistry between you and how well.
probably, yeah, 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 yeah. Although I didn't think we had any chemistry apart from chemical intake. But
Oh,
But
oh,
yeah, so that was basically the formation of the Lords. Just after that, obviously, we had to come up with a permanent name. Miles Copeland was already managing Brian James, so we obviously went with his management, and
exactly.
he wanted to call us the Lords of Discipline. We didn't quite like the word discipline in there,
Mhm.
but there was a church called the New Church in Notting Hill.
Uh-huh.
And Steve and I were driving by, oh, new church. Hey, that would be good. Not Lords of Discipline, Lords of the New Church. And
Yeah.
it kind of fitted in with our idea that, rock and roll is a new church.
Hmm.
Religion doesn't mean so much to all the fans that we're playing to, but it's in some ways it's like a communion when you go to a gig. So yeah, we called it Lords of the New Church, and I think it was a good choice.
Yeah, it was a really good choice. And I'm kind of wondering if what you guys had in mind as far as the stylistic element of the band, because this was when hair metal was getting popular. Did you automatically know that you wanted to
Yeah,
differentiate yourself
I'm not,
from?
to be honest. Okay, like, I don't think it might be different in LA, but it definitely wasn't. Um, it wasn't hair metal in London at the
Okay.
time we go. It was new romantic.
Okay.
All that hip clubs were this bunch of what they would call new romantics,
Yeah.
like Visage and I can't remember any names. Anyway, we 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 wanted to look kind of different, but there were some really good clothing stores making kind of alternate kind of stuff, and we kind of stylistically changed a little bit. Maybe you can see it in the Wanderers, but yeah, I think we wanted to describe it when we were asked initially. The first album, a pop rock, like rock about the apocalypse. So
Uh-huh.
Steve came up with this term, a pop rock.
Mhm.
And so I don't think it was really hair metal. We didn't have that long a hair yet with the Lords then. Also, Nikki was started going out with a girl from a shop called Western Styling, where
Mhm.
they had a lot of Western jewelry and cowboy boots and that. So at one point, me and Nikki and then Steve really got into these cowboy boots and the Mexican hats and all kind of things like that. So stylistically with the Lords, we were also called goth at one point, but I never thought we were really anything other than, well, I like that and I'm going to do that and that looks good, so we'll do that. But yeah, I don't think it was quite hair metal time in London then. Might
Okay.
might be
Well,
wrong.
that's
No.
I think that's for the best, and just I think it's for the best because you guys were able to just stand out on your own. You went with what you felt
Yeah, I
instinctually.
mean they build us as a super group, obviously because of Dan, Sham, and Dead Boys.
Yeah.
Um, but we didn't see it like that at all. We would just played music that we all liked,
Hmm.
and it was obviously from our various influences. Me from maybe Cream, Velvet Underground, Steve from garage bands of the '60s and a bit of Motown maybe, and Brian from the MC5 and the Stooges, the Stones, and it just mixed together really well.
Yeah.
Um, and so we just did what we felt was right without wanting to think about, what other people thought of us. Be
Exactly.
yourself.
Yeah. And along that line, I have to ask you, you've already talked about this a little bit, but tell me a bit more what it was like performing on stage with Stiv Bators.
Well, it was chaos. It was beautiful chaos. Yeah, because you never knew what Stiv was going to do. He was always unpredictable. He would be physically, he would destroy himself. He would stick his head in the bass drum for like 3 minutes. He would try and hang him. He had this trick where you could wrap the mic cord round your neck,
Mhm.
where throw it over a beam or something and look like he was hanging. But he always said, there's a trick to it. Um, Bear in mind that when you're playing on stage, I'm doing my bass bits and maybe backing vocals, so I don't always focus on Steve, but you're always aware that he's doing something, outrageous or dangerous or jumping off the stacks. He had a habit of like this weird thing on some songs where he would kind of kneel down and then he'd hop up and down on his knees, and after the gig, all his knees would swell up, but
Yeah.
he didn't mind. So it was absolutely unpredictable, chaotic, hilarious behavior. I mean, he did some great, one brilliant prank that he did on everyone. This is Steve's pranking nature.
Mhm.
We were playing a gig at the Six Flags Magic Mountain, just
Uh-huh.
north of Los Angeles. Does that ring a bell with you?
Yes, I've actually driven past there several times. I haven't been to that location specifically, but I know which one you mean.
Yeah, it's probably about an hour's drive north of LA.
Yep, it's
And
actually yeah, it's actually just between Los Angeles and Ojai where Izzy Stradlin lives now.
okay, right, yeah. But back in those days, in '85, they'd started putting bands on, and the stage was set in front of like an arena where there was a semicircle of seats, and they went up in tiered levels. So it
Cool.
was the first time I played kind of like you could look up at the audience and round to the right and that, and
Yeah.
it was full, surprisingly, because I didn't know, and there were a lot of I remember that gig because there were a lot of young young girls who obviously had started dressing in a certain fashion, and they started throwing jewelry onto stage. And that was the only time ever that that's happened. But anyway, so
Huh.
that's the setting of the gig. But down there was quite a lot of audience, and even down the front there was um, 3 or 4 guys in wheelchairs. So they've had this. Oh, the screen just went blank. Sorry. Yeah, so there's these guys sitting in wheelchairs, and we're doing Holy War, in which number Steve quite often starts like blessing the audience and that. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, he leapt off this stage, goes down to this guy sitting in a wheelchair, and starts dragging him out the chair. And I'm looking at Steve, you've gone too far this time. You can't do this. And he drags this guy who was like couldn't move his legs at all and drags him up onto stage. And this guy's kind of like in a kneeling position, and Steve's holding him up a bit like that. And then Steve starts blessing him and everything like that and says, you get up and walk, get up and walk. And all of a sudden, the guy gets up and walks and starts leaping around. Steve had arranged the whole bloody thing. So one of his mates got someone to lend a wheelchair. So he waited the whole set with this guy there. But that's the kind of thing that Steve would do. So performing with Steve on stage was great sometimes. Other times, there were a few times when Steve would start slurring his words maybe, and you never knew with Steve whether it was a prank or real.
Hmm.
He'd start slurring his words, and then he'd sort of collapse around the mic at the front of the stage, and we'd wonder when he's going to get up and start singing again. So we'd have to go out into these jams. And I quite enjoyed that because it was a challenge, to keep things going and keep the attitude and the music going. Well, kind of went up to Steve and kind of nudged him and kicked him a little bit. Come on, get up, Baters, this has gone on long enough.
Yeah.
And eventually he did. But, he would do things like that. So you never knew what was going to happen. But it was a great show, man.
Yeah, exactly, and one who is still very well remembered and loved today. I mean, I know that there were concerns for his safety and stuff, but I mean, looking back at his performances, it's easy to see, like, how magnetic he was and how talented he was.
Yeah, and he was a complex character. You know, a side people would never have seen of him. He loved ironing, so quite often, you know, you'd go around to pick him up before we go on tour, and his girlfriend or he would have left a message. Oh, he's just round at the laundrette, you know, he's doing his washing, or I'm just finishing off some ironing. He was quite a homely lad in some ways, but he had a total wild side and a side where he was, you know, didn't give a shit about his body or his well-being.
Yeah.
Yeah. So complex character.
Mhm. Alrighty, so you wound up recording 3 albums with the Lords. Do you have any favorite songs off of those, or any that you think are really representative, best represent your creativity?
Yeah, I mean it's a difficult choice, but having read your question beforehand, I did have to have a little think about it. And Russian Roulette to me was always a great song. It was actually written by Terry Chimes and Tony James, who were in that first rehearsal session with Brian and Steve before I joined them, before there was even a live gig ever done. And
Yeah.
so they wrote that then together, and I've always liked that song. I like playing it. It's a great song. Dance with Me as well. Um, I feel quite proud of Dance with Me, although no one would know this. But when Steve and Brian brought that song to rehearsals the first time, it was almost a little bit like a Rolling Stones type country riff it had to it, and a vibe. And I came up with that bass line, which I think totally changed the song, and I want credit for that. But yeah. So that's been one of my favourite ones. Murder Style, which was actually another song that I wrote,
Mhm.
even though Steve and Brian get part credits. Steve changed some of my lyrics, and Brian put the middle eight in, but that was basically my song.
Mhm.
So that has to be one of my faves. Holy War Live was always a blast, as I just mentioned about Steve and the disability incident. Uh,
Yeah.
um, yeah, so Holy War was always great way to finish the set. Usually we did it at the end of the set, and then New Church, because that was the first song we wrote, really finished as a band, um, and it said everything about what we wanted to, you know, the way we wanted the band to be presented, and everything about the philosophy of the new church.
Mhm.
And it started off with that great gothic intro, and then went into a more fast, punky new wave kind of thing. Yeah, good.
And do you still feel like Lords of the New Church is the best work that you've ever done?
Um, I I I hate to compare things like that because everything, you know, had its moments and had its special kind of feel to it, and memories and everything. But yeah, I'm very proud of what we did with the Lords, and it was the one time really where it was just so fun to be out on tour. We did hell of a lot of touring, but it was always a great bunch of people. The roadies, we had a you know, really good road crew, Ivor and Sticker, and many different ones. But yeah, it was always a really good feeling of we're all a family, we're a gang together, you
Mhm.
know, and we're going to go out and do the best shows or the worst shows that you could ever hope for. Yeah. So I do feel proud of those times, and it was just a great time with great memories.
Mhm.
Many things that could happen. I mean, there's many stories there, but you'll have to wait for the book for those.
Yep. Well, um, I'm a little curious. I mean, do you want to describe how your time in Lords of the New Church ended and how you joined Cherry Bombs?
Yeah, unfortunately, that was the only little um, aspect that wasn't quite so pleasant, I suppose. We had been playing since 1981
Mhm.
until October 1985, when we had gone out to Japan.
Mhm.
And I remember coming back from Japan on the plane when we all were going, what's happening with Miles Copeland? And you know, we were still not really getting any royalties through properly. we all said, like, we've really got to. We've been out on tour so much. We've been putting this off. Miles made excuses, but we've got to pin him down. When we get back to England, we need a meeting with him, and we need to know exactly where we stand. You
Yeah.
know, how
Hmm.
much has he made? How much has he lost? You know, where are we? You know,
Yeah.
4 5 years nearly of
Hmm.
constant touring, and okay, we had a fairly good wage, but nothing in writing.
Yeah.
So we all agreed that we will arrange a meeting. So we arranged a meeting with Miles Copeland, and he came into the meeting, and we said, you know, where do we stand? Where are we? Oh, I've got this sheet of paper here, and he had an A4 sheet of paper, and it basically said, amount spent, amount recouped, therefore you owe us. So where's all the bloody accounting? Oh, well, so and so had an episode and has gone off, and we don't know where he's put all the details on that, blah, 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 blah. But basically, how can you, account for 5 years of business on an A4 sheet of paper with
Yeah.
three facts?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I was really pissed off.
Yeah.
So after the meeting, I said, I don't want to work with this guy anymore. Can't do it. Steve was kind of on my side. Brian had always been with Miles Copeland and had a kind of special relation with Miles, and he was a bit reticent. Oh, give him a chance, blah blah blah. But at the time, Brian was probably into his heaviest spell of drinking.
Okay.
Steve was very upset about splitting up with his wife and was not in the best frame of health.
Hmm.
Nikki Nikki agreed with me, but didn't make a big stance about it. And so they said, well, there's not much we can do. We just got to give him more chance. And I was probably more pissed off than the others. Um, and just round about that time, Andy came to me and said, that Timo's a great mate and everything, but Timo himself says, I'm not really a bass player. I'm a guitarist.
Hmm.
And Andy said, I the first gig that Hanoi ever did in England was supporting the Lords at a club called the Zigzag. So
Yeah.
we'd met them back then, and our paths had crossed at various festivals. We'd done the famous one where we all partied and burnt down a hotel. Um, that's another story. But so I knew Andy and everything. So he approached me and he said, like, you're a great bass player. Um, we're looking for a bass player to replace Timo in the Cherry Bombs. So I said, well, let me think about it. I wanted to be loyal, wanted to be loyal to the Lords,
Hmm.
but part of me wanted something different. It just seemed that the Lords wasn't right then.
Yeah.
Steve and Brian had lost that real drive. Miles Copeland was ripping us off. And so I said to Andy, I'll think about it. And I remember I went round to Steve to tell Steve and to ask Steve what he thought. No, and Steve was living with Mike Monroe at the time. They were
Yeah.
sharing a flat in Fulham. And so I went round there, knocked on the door. Mike answered the door. He was all bouncy and up and up and up. And he'd been watching all these movies and he was telling me about this. And I said, well, Mike, I really need to speak to Steve. Where's Steve? Oh, he's been asleep for 3 days. Steve would do like uppers for 5 days and then sleep for 3 days
Oh my
sometimes.
goodness.
So anyway, so I went in and I kind of had to almost wake Steve up, and he was in a bit of a stupor. And I started explaining to him, and he goes, Dave, you're doing the best thing. So that was it. I
Yeah.
said, right, I'm joining the Cherry Bombs. And I did regret it in some ways, but in some ways I couldn't have stayed with the Lords the way I felt,
Yeah. And the
the way
thing is,
things were.
like, yeah. And the thing is, like, as much as people love
Oh
to,
dear. Oh,
I'm
you
sorry.
just froze then. I don't.
Oh, sorry. I'll start over. But here's the thing: like, as much as, however much someone might love doing this for the creative aspect, and and doing it for the love of their craft, ultimately, if you're not being compensated appropriately in the financial aspect and you're being ripped off or stolen from, then
Yeah.
I mean, it's Like I understand. I would like to think that I understand how you felt in that
No,
situation. I mean, it's
I mean,
like
I don't think that was definitely not only just because of the money, but that was a factor as well. A couple of factors, and that and the way that I just felt the Lords was not quite going the same anymore because of Stephen Bryan's personal demons or personal
yeah,
journey. Mm.
exactly. And not to be totally depressing, but if you don't mind talking about it, were you able to kind of were you still on good terms with Stiv Bators when he passed away?
Um, Steve I'd been out. Was living in Paris. Well, hang on a minute. Where are we now? We're me leaving the Lords, aren't we? Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, um, yeah. So later on, when I think that the Lords had come to an end, they got a replacement bass player, Grant Fleming, who incidentally used to tour manage Sham 69. So Grant was a friend of mine, and this other guy, Alistair, a friend of Brian's on guitar. So that they just about come to the end of the journey, I think, for Steve. Steve wanted to do something else, and he was living in Paris, and he came over to London, and we patched up our differences then. But that there's an interim period before, whilst I was in the Cherry Bombs, and then after the Cherry Bombs, we reformed the Lords. So that was all going good
That's right.
with the reformed Lords. Yeah, so we've missed a bit out really.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry. I did jump ahead a little bit, but someone had told me to ask about that with you if it was okay.
Okay, yeah. Well, yeah. Why we split up with the reformed Lords is another little story, but we were going to just talk, I think, about me joining the Cherry Bombs and that Cherry
Exactly.
Bombs.
Yeah, what was it like joining the Cherry Bombs?
Well, it was a breath of fresh air, to be honest. I Andy was with his first wife Stacey at the time,
Hmm.
and they had a flat just in centre of London. Um, and after he asked me to join the Cherry Bombs, I went round there and I actually had a couple of song ideas and wrote a couple of songs. Andy finished them off, if you like, with put on his input. But that was a really good little creative period. I really enjoyed that because I didn't really have much of that with the Lords.
Hmm.
Um, and in fact, I think those two songs appeared on the Suicide Twins album,
Okay.
Silver Missiles and Nightingales.
Yeah.
They recorded those, and one of them we kept for the Cherry Bombs, "Sweet Pretending."
Mhm.
But yeah, it was a good period. Um, like I say, I rekindled this friendship with Andy and met Anita, who is a lovely person. Nasty, great guy.
Mhm.
Sounds horrible name, Nasty Suicide, but he was actually a really sweet guy.
Yep.
And Terry Chimes again on
Mhm.
drums,
And
who
what was it like working with a woman as the front as your front person? I mean, you'd mostly worked with men up until that point. Was it kind of
yeah,
refreshing to have
yeah, it was, but I just saw her as a front person, you know. I mean, it wasn't, oh, we've got a girl now. But I think a lot of the audiences, that's one of the little issues we did have with the Cherry Bombs. A lot of the audiences wanted Hanoi Rocks too. And although maybe musically it was like that, they didn't quite buy into having a girl as a front person. But I thought Anita was great. Yeah,
yeah, and she's got great attitude and such a beautiful
yeah,
voice. Like
yeah,
I really
yeah.
like Cherry
She
Bombs.
looked really good. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And what was Andy like as a collaborator? I mean, was it a very fruitful partnership? Like, did you feel comfortable? Uh,
Yeah, Andy is a great writer, you know, and a great musician, and it was a really good creative period then. As I said, I wrote two songs with him. Most of the songs were Andy and Anita, but yeah, it was really good. And in those times, mainly he was quite well behaved, surprisingly enough.
yep. And I know. Just
And
I
he could be difficult. I always say that Andy is unlike anyone else you'll ever meet. He lives on planet Andy, and if you can handle the environment of planet Andy, then it's fine. But if you don't like that planet, you're not going to get on very well with him.
I know
And
what you mean.
sometimes he can do his best to piss people off. He can be a very sweet guy, and again, but you know, there's no one really like Andy McCoy that I've ever met. Just such a strange person, good and bad.
Yeah, exactly. And did you see the interview that I did with Andy McCoy?
I did, yeah, yeah,
Yes. So I've had some
yeah,
experience on Planet Andy.
yeah, yeah. I wonder if he ever answered any of the questions you asked him.
Barely. I mean, but I'll say this about Andy. I do like
He's
mistakes and all.
fascinating.
Yes, exactly. Like he is a
Yeah,
fascinating person, and like you
yeah.
pointed out, he can be extremely sweet. He's very intelligent. I mean, I don't agree with everything he says, but
No,
he's yeah. But I'm
yeah.
sorry. Go ahead.
No, no, no. I was agreeing with you. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, he's but I get what you mean, and I infinitely respect him musically though, and he really was kind of the godfather of the Sunset Strip scene, which is a type of music that I love and that I've kind
yeah.
of devoting a lot of scholarship to. So
Right,
I
right. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I
it's
mean, you know, they could have been really, really big. I think Hanoi.
exactly, and I'll always have a sadness that we didn't get to see them reach the heights that I think they deserve to reach,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah, actually, if you don't mind my asking, and I can cut this if you want, but recently, Michael Monroe posted about basically reconciling in a way with Vince Neil and meeting him at a concert. What did
yeah.
you think of that?
I don't know because I don't know Vince Neil very well at all. I've come across him a couple of times when the Lords were on tour, but I don't really know him as a person. I'm not a big fan of Motley Crue anyway. So but you know, in some ways, I can see why Andy and the guys from Hanoi could blame him. But you know, Razzle wasn't held at gunpoint into that car.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I, I I try to. Here's what I think. Like, I think that Vince Neil is kind of an asshole. I mean, not just because of the Razzle thing; it's because of other things that I've
right, right. Yeah, I
seen.
don't know about that. That's what I've heard, but you know, I don't like to really criticize someone unless I've actually had direct experience with them. But I've heard that people say that, but I don't really know him. And just the cold hard facts are that, you know, he killed Razzle in a car accident because he was drinking, but it could easily have been the other way round, maybe.
Yeah,
If Razzle was driving and drinking and could have killed Vince Neil, you know. So
yeah,
that that just that can he really? Of course, he could be blamed for Razzle's death, but you know, a lot of people drove very drunk all the time back in those days, and people were happy to get in the car with them when they were very drunk and probably were drinking as well with them. So I can understand that, and I can understand maybe Mike possibly seeing something there, but I don't know. But you say he was an arsehole, so
yeah. I mean, and what I was gonna say after that though is, I really admire Michael Monroe for being forgiving and stuff though, because ultimately I think that holding that anger and that kind of resentment in you can be very damaging. And going
yeah,
back to Andy, I mean, from what he's told me and from what he's told a lot of other journalists and people in his life, from what I understand, he never got over that. He will always hate Vince, and it really seems to have hurt him
yeah, yeah,
in a big way. And
yeah,
so I can see the psychological value in Michael wanting to be forgiving and wanting to be understanding and wanting to move past it as well. So,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
so that's how I feel. But
yeah.
anyway, so back to that. I'm sorry if I'm going off on these tangents.
That's okay. Don't worry. We've
Okay.
got time.
Okay, cool. Alrighty. So, where were we? Okay, cool. So eventually you moved on to Kill City Dragons and later on Shooting Gallery. What was it like working in Kill City Dragons? You were with Billy G. Bang.
Well, can I just mention it that again there was between between what when was it that the Cherry Bombs finished? Was 87, wasn't it? Yeah. So
Yeah.
between 87 and then 89, there was quite a lot that happened um, that is worth me mentioning. After
Okay,
the
good.
Cherry Bombs um, split up
Hmm.
after that USA tour, and we stuck together, me, Terry, and Nasty, and we, through our manager at the time, Richard Bishop, we hooked up with two guys, one called James Vane and one called Cliff Gravel, and we wanted to try something new, a different band. We formed a band called The Weird Things, WYRD. That never came to fruition, though, and it's probably not worth going into any stories about that. But then I was playing with Tyler and Bam in the Dogs d'Amour for a little while.
Yeah.
I did a tour with them, and then Nick had left the Lords, and Brian and Steve had come back to London,
Hmm.
having lived out in LA. And they hooked up with me, and they said that they wanted to, Miles Copeland was now out of the picture. They weren't working with him anymore. And did we want to reform the Lords? So basically, I'd met this guy called Danny Fury, who's a drummer.
Hmm.
And I said, well, I've got Danny, me the bass, we've got the Lords, let's put it back together again. So we did quite a bit of touring in 1988 and 1989. And then the famous incident where Steve came on stage at the Astoria in London with a T-shirt that had the printing of an advert that Brian had put in NME looking for a new singer. I won't again go into all the details of why, because it's been talked about probably, unless you want me to. Um, but
Well, go ahead. I mean, it's
well,
always
to
worth
cut a
listening.
long story short, there's two different stories. We didn't have any record label at the time. We didn't have any management. I was basically talking to the booking agencies and booking tours, and that's the way we were surviving through gig money.
Hmm.
And we booked quite a lot of tours in Europe, gigs in Europe, and suddenly Steve, who was then living in Paris, said that he had a bad back and he couldn't do the gigs. Um, he could probably do the one at the Astoria, which was at the end of the set of gigs, because
Yeah.
his back might be better than then, but he didn't think he could do that. And apparently, then Brian came to me and said that someone had told him that Steve was out and about clubbing in Paris and didn't look like he had a bad back, and we needed to do the gigs. So Brian's apparently had spoke to Steve, and Steve had said, well, if you want to get someone else in, I don't know whether, there's different stories on that, but basically Brian said, Steve said it was okay. So Brian put an ad in the music press. We did a few auditions and no one was anywhere near a Steve Baters. So in the end,
Yeah.
we decided, well, we have to cancel the shows. So we did that, but we did the Astoria show, and Steve must have found out that we put this ad in the press, and he had a T-shirt printed up, and he didn't tell us about it. And during the encore of the song, he came out on stage and started dancing in front of the band and with the saying things to the audience about they're trying to sack me, but I'm sacking them. And he was dancing in front of me, pointing at the T-shirt, and I'm playing bass. I'm not going to read what's on the T-shirt. I thought he was just saying, "Look, I've got a cool T-shirt." So I went, "Oh, great!" Kind of. Well, I'm playing away, and it was only afterwards that I realised Steve was really pissed off, and he had a taxi waiting. So as soon as we'd finished the last number, he just left by the stage door in a taxi, and that was the last Brian spoke with him. But as I say, previously we were speaking, I had hooked up with Steve, and he kind of understood that, I had nothing against Steve and blah blah blah. So we you know made amends.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
was happy. I was very glad that when Steve passed away, I'd had a chance to make up that so-called difference. But
Yeah.
Brian always regretted that he never made it up again with Steve. Didn't have the chance
Yeah.
before he
And
died.
that's a shame for him, but I'm glad that you had that moment with him and it sounds like you've come
Yeah.
to a place where you're really proud of the work that you did together.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and very proud to have worked with Steve. And I was there at his funeral, and it's the only time I've seen a dead body, in a coffin, because
Oh.
Steve wanted a proper funeral. Sorry, proper a Catholic funeral where apparently, I'm not familiar with the Catholic rituals, but when you're dead, people can come up and touch the dead body. So I said goodbye to him like that, which was for me, a very strange and moving experience.
Mm, yeah, exactly. Always a memorable experience when it involves him, huh?
Yeah, but then to answer your question now, again about Kill City Dragons, that when we did the last gigs that we did with the Reformed Lords,
Hmm.
Steve got a friend of his called Steve Von Saint, who'd been
Yes.
in a band with called Angels in Vain, and he played with Steve, I think in Steve's Evil Boys or something. Anyway, Steve knew him, and Steve Von Saint was in London. He'd come to London to try and get something together, but he was struggling, didn't have any money. So Steve said, "Well, we're looking for a driver. Do you fancy driving us?" So he became the driver in those gigs. So I got to know him like that. And then when um, Steve ended the Lords by exiting the stage for the very last time
Yeah.
with the Lords, me and Danny, the rhythm section of the Reformed Lords, um, hooked up with Steve Von Saint as a guitarist, and we hit it off. And so we said, right, let's get a singer. So Steve had a mutual friend in New York, Billy Billy G. Bang,
Hmm.
Billy Douglas is his real name. William Douglas was working at the Scrap Bar, which was a rock and roll bar in New York City. And he'd been in bands, but at the moment he wasn't doing anything. So he agreed to come over to London, in a way, mirroring just how we'd got Steve into the Wanderers
Hmm.
from the States. Now we get a singer from the States into the what turned out to be Kill City Dragons.
Yep.
And yeah, so that's how that came about. And we had a big following, and things were going well, but for some reason we just couldn't get a record deal.
Mm, okay.
We nearly did. We were at Warner Brothers, and they were saying that yeah, deals on the table as soon as whatever his name was gets back. They're in the States at the moment. As soon as we get back, we'll put signatures to paper. And then we never heard from him again.
Well, I mean
Crazy.
yeah, I mean
No
that kind of
explanation, nothing. We were on the phone. When's he coming back? Oh, he's back now. Well, aren't we gonna? Don't think so. No. So we didn't get signed to them. We put out an EP in the end with it on an indie kind of
yeah.
label with a friend. But yeah, but Kill City Dragons, it again, it was a good band. Probably not the best ever that I've been in, but enjoyable, very enjoyable time.
Yeah. And that kind of what you were saying before about Warner Brothers kind of leads me into another question. We're moving towards the grunge era now. Do you think that being in that era and since you were associated kind of with the retro rock kind of the retro rock scene, do you think that kind of hurt your standing and hurt your ability to get record deals and to move to another level of success with Kill City Dragons
Well, I
or
can't say. Well, no, because I don't think that it was mainly with Shooting Gallery that
okay.
I think the grunge thing was happening. I might not have got my dates quite right, but Kill City Dragons didn't last that long, and Andy McCoy came over to London looking for a bass player and a singer, saw us with the Kill City Dragons, and at that time Billy and Steve Von Saint were having a few differences, and so Billy said, "I want to do it," and so I said, "Well, if you're going, I'm not going to stay in the Dragons. I'll come with you." And Billy and I went out to form Shooting Gallery. Andy already had a deal um, with Mercury. But I think that was the time then that the grunge thing was happening, and that may have influenced the record labels because Mercury definitely didn't put everything that we thought we deserved into promoting the band and backing the band.
Yeah, and I've seen your live performances with Shooting Gallery. I mean, you guys are a really tight, great band. I think that could have gone a
Yeah,
little bit further than it did, but
one of the best drummers I played with, Paul Garisto, really tight. Andy, what a brilliant guitarist. Me, make your own mind up. Am I a brilliant bass player? I don't. But anyway, yeah, it was a great band. Yeah, and should have. I think at the time again, I thought maybe we're putting a bit too much in overcomplicating the songs. If that would be a slight criticism, But again, now when I listen back, I like them.
Mm, yeah, I like him too, and I like how and "Nature of My Business" is a really great song from that. Do you kind of
Yeah.
remember how you guys came up with that?
Well, Andy had most of the songs,
Okay.
He'd been obviously working a lot, and most of the songs that we did, maybe not Devil Calling, because again, that was one that I wrote originally with Nasty Suicide, but most of the songs were all already written when Billy and I went over there.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and some great songs. Andy's a very good songwriter.
Yeah. And I really like the cover that you guys did of Brown Eyed Girl. I know that Andy still does it in concert
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah, that's great. Yeah, yeah. We all loved that song. Yeah, bit
Yeah.
different. Yeah,
Exactly. Like it's kind of a nice departure for you guys.
yeah. But like I say, I have very eclectic tastes, and I like the challenge of doing different styles of music. As long as yeah. I do.
Yeah, and I mean, and Andy's eclectic as well. I mean, I know that he's a big fan of flamenco guitar.
Yeah, on it. He's a good flamenco guitarist. Yeah, I've had a few times when Andy and me have just been on our own, and he's just sitting outside in the sun in LA and just started playing beautiful guitar flamenco. Yeah,
Exactly.
and a very good experience.
Anyway, describe to me a little bit more about what it was like progressing in shooting gallery. I mean, you guys opened for Kiss at one point. Is that true?
Yeah, that was quite interesting because they were doing the tour without all the makeup and
Yeah.
everything, back to the roots. Yeah, that was a good fun. Yeah, yeah. The
Mhm.
LA riots were also occurring at that time,
Yeah.
um, and my daughter had just been born, and I was like in two minds as to whether I should leave her on her own with my wife in Los Angeles and do the tour. But my wife said, "Well, you got to do it," and I was felt a bit guilty. But my wife's sister came over from Germany to help her with the newborn baby,
Okay.
And so I left them, and then 2 days later, I tried to phone my wife, and there was no answer. And I was starting to freak out. What's happening? So I got in touch with um, Rick Browdy, who had produced um, the Shooting Gallery album, and
Yes.
I was going to ask him, can you pop round and see if they're okay? And he said, "Don't worry, I've already been there. The riots were encroaching on, Hollywood Sunset and everything. And so I've taken them up into my house in the hills, and your wife and her sister and your newborn baby are safe there."
Ah,
I
thank
was
goodness.
quite relieved. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll confess, Dave, I actually didn't know that you had a daughter. Do you mind if we
Oh,
go into if I ask you a couple of questions about that?
no, not at all.
Cool.
Fire
Well,
away.
okay, thank you. Alrighty. So what was it like becoming a father after all those years?
Well, yeah, it was a bit of a shock because when it's my ex-wife now, but when we first got together, which was more or less when I joined the Kill City Dragons,
Hmm.
um, we both said we don't really want children. But then we moved to Los Angeles, and I think my my ex's grandmother died, and she suddenly sort of changed her mind about wanting kids. So we decided, yeah, we'll have a child, and so Lucy was born as an American citizen, born in Hollywood,
Aw.
but she didn't live there very long. But she was born there. Yeah.
And what was it like having a newborn baby? I mean, was it something that you really loved and that you took to once you came home from the tour?
Oh yeah. Well, I had I just before we went on the tour, I think she was already a month old. So
Okay.
yeah, I'd had a month's worth of this newborn child, and I absolutely adored her. Yeah,
Aw.
yeah, yeah. And we've been very close ever since.
Yeah.
We have a very close relationship,
Excellent.
even though I hardly ever get to see her in person because she's all over she lived in Vietnam for 5 years, and now she's in Berlin. But
Whoa.
yeah, we're very close still. Yeah.
Nice. So she's kind of a globetrotter like her daddy.
Yeah, she definitely is well traveled. Yeah.
Excellent. And did she kind of change your perspective on your career? I mean, did you feel the need to make any changes or?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the main thing that happened, after shooting gallery, um, Paul Garisto, the drummer, he
Yes.
knew this guitarist, this Japanese guitarist that we call Jam, whose real name is Takashi Ohashi. And me, Billy, and Paul wanted to stay together.
Hmm.
And Paul said, well, I know this guitarist and he's in town. Um, I think it might be a good idea to replace Andy with this guy. So we did that and we formed the Slumlords. Um, and we only we recorded an EP which only came out in Japan, and we only did gigs in Japan. But we that was again one of my most amazing times. We played 12 nights back to back with 2 sets each night, so 24 gigs in 12 days.
Wow.
Um, in at the Billboard Cafe in Tokyo, and it was just great for me because we got so tight and so good. We were almost like we kept going off into these jams and really kicking off. Me and Paul, and then the guitarist. It was a musically one of my biggest highs, I think. But not many people have heard of them and know about it. And I think we had some. Have you ever heard of that band?
No, but I can provide a link to your music though when I post the interview if you'd like.
If you can find it, yeah, it's the band's name is the Slumlords. There
Slumlord.
have been other bands called Slumlords. The EP was called Hardy Har Har, which apparently is some phrase from an American comedy show
Hmm.
that Paul knows about. I can't remember now. But yeah, I think we had some really good songs, and I kind of wish we could have taken that a bit further. But I I had Billy was having getting a real problem with drugs at the time, and
Yes.
and so basically we couldn't keep going. My wife really did not like bringing up the child in Los Angeles. She couldn't drive, and as you probably know, if you can't drive in LA, you're really reliant on other people. And if you got a baby, a young baby, so if I was going to do any gigs or anything like that, she felt stranded. She was beginning to get disillusioned with LA, and so she wanted to move back to London. I said that I would probably prefer my daughter to be educated in England rather than Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And so we moved back to England. So really that was the end of the slumlords.
Okay.
And then comes on to your question, did having a baby change? When I got back to England, a lot of the people that I'd been playing with and the scene that I'd recognized, the music scene, it had changed quite a lot in London. And I tried with a couple of people to get a musical outfit going. Wasn't having a lot of success, and I was getting a bit worried, finances and everything. We got this child, I didn't want to be continually living on state benefits. So I thought, well, I've got to get a job, got to do something to earn some money. But I thought, what can I do? Um, and I'd always had a good logical brain,
Mhm.
and I had a chat with someone at this employment agency to help people get back into work. And they kind of said, well, why don't you do a computer course in computer programming?
Mhm.
So I said, all right, I'll give it a go. So I went off to this computer course and did a course in COBOL programming, which is an old fashioned computer language now. But they had a room with all computers in where the students would practice practically, writing computer code and designing programs and stuff.
Mhm.
And they asked me to help out once I'd finished the course. You can stay on here at the um, computer college and help people in the machine room, as they called it. And apparently, I kept getting feedback that I was very good at explaining things to them. And I got asked, well, would you like to have a job here as a tutor and teach the course? I said, well, I've hardly just known it myself. Me teach. I hate education. I never got on with teachers, but I'll give it a try. So I had this nerve-wracking experience, which is I've played in front of many Nazi skinheads throwing bricks at the and glasses at the stage, and I'd done all these things in front of bands and everything, but nothing was more scary to me than the first time I had to stand up in front of 20 people sitting at desks and trying to, deliver this course on a computer programming, which I'd only just gone through myself and felt like I knew hardly anything about. But apparently I was pretty good at it, and I managed to survive doing that for a while. But I was very lucky, Michaela, because from all the time I had that day job, I always managed somehow to have time to play in bands as well.
Mhm.
My employers were easily persuaded, if I had to go off and do gigs and stuff. They liked me and I was good. And so I managed somehow to have a parallel universe for a while of having a day job and also, um, you know, working in bands, of which there were many at that time, I think,
Yeah, exactly.
some of which I thought, again, were really good bands. To mention a few, I was playing in the Endorphins.
Hmm.
We did a couple of gigs in LA as well. If you could ever find out what dates those were, I need to remember those.
Okay.
Played with again a few things with Dogs D'Amour, with Brian James again in the Brian James Gang.
Hmm.
Um, the Tango Pirates, which was a band that I had with Danny. The
Yep.
Crunch, which I think was a brilliant band with Terry Chimes again on drums, Mick Geggus from the Cockney Rejects on guitar, and a Swedish singer called Sulo. We did 2 albums, which I really rate. I think they're great albums. I don't know if you've ever heard of those either, because
Well,
those are
I've listened to the Tango Pirates, and I really love the work that you did with Anita Chelema.
right. Okay, I was going to mention her as well, but you should check out the Crunch.
Okay,
We did 2 albums
I will.
with the Crunch, and they're really good songs. Yeah, and
Excellent.
yeah, and of course with Anita and playing with Timo as well with Anita.
Mhm. Yep,
So
I've actually,
so
and I've
all
seen.
that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say. So all that time with all those outfits, I was still managing somehow to just about keep the teaching going.
Yep. So you were able to be a father and have a career and be a musician all at
Yeah,
the same time.
yeah. What a luxury.
Yeah, exactly. And it
Yeah,
must have felt very rewarding being there for your daughter and just.
yeah, yeah. And even though when she was 6, I split up with my who's my ex-wife now, my daughter's mother.
Mhm.
Um, I would still, every night I would go and read her bedtime stories, and I'd take away on holidays with just me and her, you know, up until she was 18 nearly. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Just and I love hearing about when people become parents after careers like that because I can feel the joy that it gives them and just how nice it was making a transition from being a full-time musician to being able to, have kind of a calmer life to
Yeah,
as
because
well.
if I'd have kept up in a band where you were constantly out on the road, I'd have never seen my daughter grow up, and that to me somehow was more important.
Mhm.
So that was the priority, really. If I can do music as well, God knows if any of those bands had really taken off, I would have had a dilemma. But none of them really took off for various reasons. They were good at the time, and we did, one off or a couple of album recordings, stuff like that. But yeah, never did I have to make that choice. Right, they want to go on 6 months tour of the world.
Yeah.
How am I going to do that and see my daughter? So yeah, I didn't have to make the choice. So.
And I really like the footage that I've seen of the Tango Pirates as well. That was you and Timo Calcio and who else?
Danny Fury was the singer
Danny Fury.
who
That's
was
right.
drumming with the reformed Lords back in '88. He was a drummer then,
Hmm.
but he wrote songs and he wanted to try and be a front man. I think, to be very, very honest, and I will be happily to tell him this, but I think he was a better drummer than he was a front man. Wrote
Okay.
some good songs, but yeah, we gave it a good shot though.
Yeah.
We had his girlfriend Vera playing bass, and because I was a rhythm guitarist, Timo was the lead in that outfit,
Yes.
which is
Exactly.
the only time I played guitar in a band, apart from those first two gigs with Sham 69.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Well,
can tell that.
I played acoustic guitar on some Anita Chelomar songs.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like the music video that you did with Anita Chelma and Timo Caltio as well. Just it's really
Yeah,
moving.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Give me the answer. That one, wasn't it?
yeah. Give me the answer. Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's
that was a great fun making that video actually. When we had our faces painted.
yeah, it's got a
Yeah,
wonderful look to it and a wonderful vibe. Just I love
yeah.
Anita's work. It would be really cool if you guys could kind of do a little mini reunion at some point.
Yeah, unfortunately, Timo won't be able to join us, but yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that a minute ago I was kind of letting you talk and take the rein, and I can tell that you're going to be a really good memoirist. Like, just you have such vivid memories, and you describe it so well. Like, I'm
I'm
excited to
glad
read
you
it.
think so because I regret that a lot of the things that I would are hazy. I don't know. Well, did that happen then, or was that after that, or was that incident then? So that's what I'm trying to do a lot of research to try and get some kind of timeline if I'm going to write this book. Um, so I get as much correct as I can. But the problem is that you talk to people and they have different stories about different incidents and when they happened, how they happened, who was involved, what occurred.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a little bit difficult getting the absolute truth if there ever is an absolute truth.
Yeah, and but as far as like pinpointing the dates of the locations, I'm happy to help you with that. I mean, like I said, I'm here in Los Angeles, so if you need dates about shows that you did at the Whiskey or other locations,
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and like I
Or,
said, I'm going to be there tomorrow, so I can
yeah,
stop by the Whiskey and see if they have any information on Lords or
yeah.
yeah,
Or the Wanderers or Sham 69.
yeah,
Yeah, mm,
exactly. I'll do that. So.
right.
And kind of going back to what you were saying before, I mean, it's you've had such a long career and you've been in so many bands, but also you haven't been interviewed much. So there are things that I'm learning just listening to you. And like I
Okay.
said, I
Mm,
didn't know that you had a daughter, and there were some bands that I hadn't heard of before. But I mean, I hope that my research still comes
mm.
across well. I look, I, I worked
Yeah,
really
yeah.
hard.
I mean, the even when I'm thinking about this book, I suddenly think, actually, I played with those people for a few weeks, and I did this for a few weeks. So there's even things that my memory, and meeting Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones, Robert Plant, even meeting them,
Mhm.
my memory's blurred about that. So there's a lot of things that maybe I suddenly remember as I'm doing research. Ah, yes, wasn't that? Ah, I must ask so and so about that because I'm not quite sure when that happened.
Yeah, and it's good to get input
Those
from
kind
other
of
people.
things.
I'm sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, no, I was just,
But yeah, it's always good to get input from other people because even if people have differing accounts of certain events, you can at least get a better perspective of it and really and like you were pointing out, it might jog your memory to certain things that
yeah,
happened before.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I'm and again, I have to admit you're probably one of the best storytellers among my interviewees too. Like you have a really good you do a really good job with describing things and and
I was
recalling what
just
went
saying to my wife Christina that I'm terrible at interviews. This is going to be really bad. So I'm very happy to hear that. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think you've done a wonderful job, and again, I give Chrissy a lot of credit as well because she was the one who came to me, and
All
she's a
right.
great
Yeah.
champion for you. So a lot of props to her.
Yeah, definitely.
Alrighty, cool. So
Right.
let's get back to these. Oh, so very recently you reunited with the surviving members of Lords of the New Church, and you had Michael Monroe filling in for Stiv Bators. Describe what that was like.
Yeah, that was a brilliant event. many thanks to Eugene from Vive la Rock for putting that together. And
Yes.
he approached me and said, like, I'd love the Lords to do a little set for the Vive la Rock Awards, um, with Mike Monroe singing, because at the time he had something to do with maybe managing Mike or something to do.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I hadn't seen Michael for ages and ages. And when we um, had the first rehearsal, I knew it was going to be great because Mike was absolutely brilliant. Brian had been for several months. I mean, he'd been out with the Damned, but he'd been recovering from, you know, a, a bout of ill health,
Yeah.
operation and everything. So he was not very lively, let's put it on stage, but I hope people would understand actually why, because he was brave to actually do that, to
Yeah.
get up on stage with the Damned and then with the Lords again. So although he didn't move, his guitar playing was just as brilliant as ever. Um, Unfortunately, we couldn't get Nicky on drums because Nicky had been away on holiday, but his holiday finished the day before the show. So he arrived in London late the night before, so he was able to get up on stage and do a little bit of hand claps and backing vocals. Um, we had, a keyboard player who had done many tours with the Lords, originally Mark Taylor,
Mhm.
um, and Terry admirably, although he was never in Lords of the New Church, he was in the, um, the formation, um, with Tony James and him and Brian and Stiv. So he wrote Russian Roulette. So he had a
Exactly.
relevance to be the drummer, and he agreed to do that. And so it was absolutely brilliant experience and very enjoyable. And Eugene did a wonderful job putting it all together.
Yeah.
And it was in a beautiful old theatre, Shepherd's Bush Empire,
Mhm.
so it was a great setting to do it. And it got pretty much across the board good reviews, and we went down well.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And everyone that I know who was there or who watched it later on absolutely loved it. It got a great um reception from the audience as well. Do you think it might be
Yeah.
something that you'd be willing to do again in the future?
Well, we kind of hadn't talked about it. That I think everybody involved, even Nicky Turner, might even do some drumming. But at the moment, it's everyone's got other things going on as well. So it's not something that we've said there's a possibility. So let's keep doors open
Hmm.
on that one. But
Yeah.
I'd like to do it. If everyone else wants to do it, I'm definitely there.
Excellent. And
Mm.
you're also playing with Sham 69 again as well. What's it
Yeah,
like
and
playing?
I've been doing that. I realise, that I've been back with my original band since 2011.
Yeah,
So it's
exactly.
it's definitely the band that I've been in the longest. And yeah, when they asked me to come back, um, I was quite happy to give it a go. And then as soon as I got back with those Dave and Jimmy, it was like long lost brothers or whatever. And yeah, it was just right, felt right to do, and it's really good fun doing it. I absolutely love the fact that though in the old days, in the first time round when I was in them, there was a lot of trouble at gigs, but I still, was able to enjoy the experience, even though there were some difficult times and fights and everything like that. But that made me a man. I was a quite a shy young 22-year-old when I joined Sham and never seen anything the like of, like skinhead violence or anything. But I came through that, and that made me a man, as they say.
Yeah.
Silly expression, really. But there you go. And now back with the family again. It's just great, It's really good that we have none of that skinhead violence at the gigs. The audiences, as we go on, are getting more and more eclectic, and more young people coming to see us and wondering, what is it like to see an old school punk band? And I must say that a lot of the old school punk bands that I've seen look like they're old. And although we can't deny we are getting on a bit now with Sham, when you look at the gigs that we do, I look at them, I think there's still a lot of energy there. These
Mhm.
guys are giving their all, and that's what because if we were just standing there and going through the motions, I wouldn't want to do it, and nor would Jimmy or Dave. But we give it everything, and
Yep.
it's really rewarding to get a good reaction and a good crowd there, and very enjoyable. Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm curious about is if you've had a musician come up to you and tell you that that you were an influence on them, or that or that your work meant a lot to them. Has that ever happened?
I've had several that come up to me and said, "You've made me give up bass playing."
Oh my god. Well,
Um,
it's
but I don't know whether
it's
they mean because bass playing's so bad that no one can ever do it. No, that's a bit of a lie. No, I have had several people come up and say they've been influenced by my bass playing. Yeah, and it's very nice to hear that. I've been influenced by many bass players, so I'm glad to hear that I could influence others. But I would always say to any bass player, don't copy. Try and you can have influences for sure, but try and find your own little niche of doing it. And that's what some people say. Most people say to me, I guess that if they're really thinking about my bass playing, they say, you play it more sometimes like a guitarist rather than a bass player.
hmm, right. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I think what they meant was that you do such a great job that they feel a little intimidated to start.
I like doing melodic bass lines, and the bass line itself can have a melody to it rather than just plugging on the root note.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's what I get off from
Mhm. And I think that shows through in your work.
inventing ways around a song on the bass. Yeah,
But yeah, I've noticed that in your bass playing too, and I actually really like it. I think that it's added a lot to the sound of the Lords of the New Church and the other bands that you've been a part of.
yeah. Well, a lot of people do say that it is, it's a feature, not just a background. Yeah,
Exactly. Yep.
yeah.
And um, you know, I and I hang out with a lot of musicians here in Los Angeles. And when I announced that I was doing this interview, there was such a great response, and a lot of people have actually said, he's been interviewed so little, and I'm glad that you're gonna get his side of the story, and that we're gonna hear his perspective on it. So
Mm. Great. That's good to hear. Yeah,
yeah,
especially as I'm a little bit isolated now in the middle of nowhere in Finland. But
yeah,
I must say I'm very happy here too.
yeah. And that was actually one thing that another fan wanted me to ask about. How did you wind up moving to Finland, and how do you like living there?
Well, I ended up moving here. The main reason, obviously, is because when the Tango Pirates came over to do a gig here, I had been in a band called the Endorphins, which I briefly mentioned it, with a guy called Damien Cullen, who was a singer of the Endorphins, and he had back then even he was going out with a Finnish girl. He ended up moving to Finland, and so he wanted Tango Pirates to come over and support his band in Finland.
Hmm.
So we came over and did, I think, 4 gigs. And the first gig was in a place called Tampere in Finland.
Yeah.
And as I arrived at the venue, the girl on the merch desk was Christina,
Hmm.
and she immediately came over to me and said, I'm a bit of a fan. I'm so happy to meet you. Would you speak to my ex? So I had a she put me on the phone, who was a big Lords fan, and so I had a quick chat with the ex, and so I got to know Christina. And by the end of the tour, we'd kind of decided that we had a mutual affection for each other.
Oh.
And when I went back to London, we carried that on for a little while and decided that, we had to live together. We fell in love and didn't want to be apart. So she came over and lived 8 years in London. And then this house came up for sale, which was close to, well, next door neighbour over the other side of a field, to her father's place. And she'd always said that, when her father gets old, she promised that she would be there to look after him, and we were able to buy this house next door. So I moved over to Finland with my wife and in a home here, which is in the middle of a beautiful setting, and it's a bit remote. It's a farming community mainly,
Mhm.
but I love it here.
Excellent. And you've collaborated musically with her now as well.
Yeah, yeah, we've done a couple of gigs together, and we're next weekend we're going into the studio to finish off 3 more songs, and then we'll have an album's worth of material to publish.
Excellent. Yep. And are you really
Mm.
excited about promoting that?
Yeah, yeah, it's going to be great. I mean, to me, the obviously the difference with every other band that I've been in is that she sings in Finnish, so
Yeah.
I don't really know what the songs are about. Okay, you can she because you can't translate Finnish really. It's a very strange language, and Christina, who's got a very good, um, a very good understanding of the English language and speaks very eloquently in English, she finds it very difficult to convey the same kind of emotion with some of the words in Finnish and try and translate them to English. So that's one thing that I don't know, but I love the melodies and it's a bit of a challenge. It's definitely got a Finnish um, aspect to it.
Mhm.
More traditional Finnish music is in there somewhere, but it's bluesy, it's rocky, it's poppy, and it's fun to play. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to releasing the album and maybe doing some more gigs.
Excellent. Yeah. And alrighty, so coming towards the end of the interview, what's the most valuable thing that you've learned from being a musician?
This is probably quite a difficult question because I'm not sure that just because I'm a musician I've learned anything. I mean, musically I've learned a lot and played with some brilliant people and had to play some difficult music, some easy music. So musically, I've learned a lot, obviously.
Yeah.
But life-wise, have I learned more being a musician than had I not been a musician? I don't know. Um, I've certainly learned to be more confident, and I've learned to stand up against a lot of aggression and a lot of situations where I probably wouldn't have been um, I'd probably shy away from had I not joined Sham 69 and Lords of the New Church. And so confrontation I can handle.
Mm.
Um, what else have I learned? Hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's much that I've learned from being a musician. Yeah, ask me an easy one.
Alrighty, cool. So what dreams and goals do you have for the future, professionally, personally, and artistically?
Well, as I already mentioned, I would love to finally get this book sorted,
Mhm.
um, and also just keep recording. Well, keep recording. I say keep recording. I mean record at all. I have got lots and lots of song ideas, and I've been like recording little riffs that I play on acoustic guitar and melodies, and I've got loads and loads and loads of songs. So I want at some point when I've got finally cleared of all the things that need to be done moving to Finland, like the house needs a lot of work on it, the gardens need a lot of work. And so I've been kind of concentrating on that. But at some point, I'm going to have a time where things are clear and I'm gonna need some equipment I've still got in London because I've still got a flat in London. I
Yeah.
haven't given that up yet. My stepdaughter lives there looking after it for me.
Oh, cool.
But yes, I would love to record those and maybe selfishly, I don't want anyone else involved. I want to do it all myself. If I can manage to program drums and things like that very well, I might. If I can't do that, I know of someone who can, but I would like to give it all a try. I won't be able to
Nice.
play live drums, but I would like to be able to play anything else that goes on it myself.
Excellent.
However, the one stumbling block is lyrics. That will take, I don't know when I start, if I start really concentrating on it, maybe I can find a way of writing lyrics, but I do find it quite a chore. It doesn't come easy to me. Then again, my wife is very good at lyrics. So if she can help me on that, maybe I'll be able to then complete all the songs lyrically and then I would sing them.
Well, it
So that's
sounds
my big wish
excellent.
to finish off all these little song ideas that I have. And they're all very different from many different styles. So I don't know how many will turn out to be the finished article, but we'll see. That's my dream.
Excellent. All right. So, anything you want to add before we sign off?
I'm exhausted. No, no, it was a wonderful interview, and thank you very much, Michaela. If you can help me with those dates, and anyone listening, if you ever want to comment that, yeah, I was at this gig, I saw this happen, I remember this, I I was there. It was definitely the 13th of January 1983, and not as it says on setlist.fm, the 19th of January. There's a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot of gigs that when I look, setlist.fm, do you know that site?
Yes. Yeah, I've been there a lot.
That lists a lot of concerts, but some of them I think, well, we can't possibly have done that because we weren't there, or maybe we were. So, if anyone categorically, or there's a lot of flyers that people have, gig flyers that
Yes. Yeah,
says the
exactly.
exact dates, because that's really what I'm at. I don't need to know, I saw the Lords, I think it was 1983. What I want is I saw the Lords on January the 13th, 1983, and it was in this town.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, you want a very accurate chronology of
Absolutely. Yeah. That would be ideal. That would help put things in order for me. And of course, if any incidents, any, times you talk to anyone from the Lords, that's always interesting to hear. That sparks things as well. Yeah.
excellent. Well,
Oh,
like I
put the
said,
feelers in.
I'll help you with that as much as I can. And
Brilliant.
thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah. So did I. It was a very good interview. I enjoyed it.
Excellent.
And
Alrighty, cool. So
hopefully we'll get to meet you one day.
yeah, exactly. I would love to meet you. And here's the thing, I'm actually going to be in Europe this coming year. I think in March I'm going to be in England. So
Okay.
if you yeah, if you're in town that day, or if you have possibly a gig there, I'd love to come and
I
see that.
know we've got some gigs coming up in March and April, and some that haven't quite been finalised yet. But we definitely, I will probably be in February, March, and April. I'll probably be a bit more in England than usual. Yeah,
Excellent. Excellent. You know what? I can probably plan it a little bit around that because I haven't bought my tickets yet, but March is when I plan to be there. So like I said, keep me updated, and I'll try to plan
yeah,
my trip so that I can be there on at least one of your gig days.
brilliant. Okay, cool.